Hello, your friendly neighborhood host, JT Wheatley, here again for another episode of the History of Comics podcast. This time, the War on Comics supplement, the Comics Code Authority. After thinking about it, I thought it was finally time to actually spell out exactly what the Comics Code Authority, otherwise known as the CCA, actually did in restricting the creativity of comic books after it was implemented in 1954. So I'm just going to read it out straight. Many people can read it out, but I'm also going to do a little commentary about it, just to illustrate just what the comic book creators were dealing with. So with that, here is the Code for Editorial Matter. General Standards, Part A. 1. Crime shall never be presented in such a way as to create sympathy for the criminal, to promote distrust of the forces of law and justice, or to inspire others with a desire to imitate crimes. 2. No comic shall explicitly present this unique details and methods of a crime. 3. Policemen, judges, government officials, and respected institutions shall never be presented in such a way as to create disrespect for an established authority. 4. If crime is to be depicted, it shall be as a sordid and unpleasant activity. 5. Criminals shall not be presented so as to be rendered glamorous or to occupy a position which creates desire for emulation. 6. In every instance, good shall triumph over evil, and the criminal shall be punished for his misdeeds. Notice he said his, no her there. 7. Scenes of excessive violence shall be prohibited. Scenes of brutal torture, excessive and unnecessary knife and gunplay, physical agony, gory and gruesome crimes shall be eliminated. 8. No unique or unusual methods of concealing weapons shall be shown. 9. Instances of law enforcement officers dying as a result of criminals' activities shall be discouraged. 10. The crime of kidnapping shall never be portrayed in any detail, nor shall have any profit accrue to the abductor or kidnapper. The criminal or kidnapper must be punished in every case. 11. The letters in the word crime on a comics magazine shall never be appreciably greater in dimension than the other words contained in the title. The word crime shall never appear alone on the cover. This is something Luke Gleason fought for, as crime was allowed to be used in the title, but they had to tamp it down a little bit. 12. Restraint in the use of the word crime in titles or subtitles shall be exercised. Like I said earlier, restraint, but it wasn't completely banned. Liv Grissom of Crime Doesn't Pay really fought for his title. General Standards Part B. 1. No comic shall use the word horror or terror in its title. That's where EC really got screwed. 2. All scenes of horror, excessive bloodshed, gory, or gruesome crimes, depravity, lust, sadism, masochism shall not be permitted. 3. All lurid, unsavory, gruesome illustrations shall be eliminated. 4. Inclusion of stories dealing with evil shall be used or shall be published only with the intent to illustrate a moral issue, and in no case shall evil be presented alluring, nor as to injure the sensibilities of the reader. 5. Scenes dealing with instruments associated with The Walking Dead, torture, vampires and vampirism, ghouls, cannibalism, and werewolfism are prohibited. General Standards Part C. Ridicule or attack of any religious or racial group is not permissible. Admirable, but that's still trampling of free speech, unfortunately. Costume. 1. Nudity in any form is prohibited, as is indecent or undue exposure. 2. Suggestive and salacious illustrations or suggestive posture is unacceptable. 3. All characters shall be depicted and dressed reasonably acceptable to society. 4. Females shall be drawn realistically without exaggeration of any physical qualities. Note, it should be recognized that all prohibitions dealing with costume, dialogue, or artwork apply to as specifically to the cover of a comics magazine as they do to the contents. Basically, the cover and the interior of the comic have to be both at the same standards with this. Marriage and sex. Divorce shall not be treated humorously or represented as desirable. The 1950s, what can you say? 2. Illicit sex relations are neither to be hinted at or portrayed. Violent love scenes as well as sexual abnormalities are unacceptable. Sexual abnormalities probably referring to homosexuality there. 3. Respect for parents, the moral code, and for honorable behavior shall be fostered. A sympathetic understanding of the problems of love is not a license for morbid distortion. 4. The treatment of love romance stories shall be to influence the value of the home and the sanctity of marriage. 5. Passion and romantic interest shall be treated in such a way as to stimulate the lower and baser emotions. 6. Seduction and rape shall never be shown or suggested. 7. Sex perversion or any influence to the same is strictly forbidden. Code for advertising matter. These regulations are applicable to all magazines published by the members of the Comics Magazine Association of America, Incorporated. Good taste shall be the guiding principle in acceptance of advertising. 1. Liquor and tobacco advertising is not acceptable. 2. Advertising sex or sex instruction books are not acceptable. 3. The sale of picture postcards, pinups, art studies, or any reproduction of nude or semi-nude figures is prohibited. They finally went over those nudie art magazines with this one. 4. Advertising for the sale of knives or realistic gun facsimiles is prohibited. As pointing out, Frederick Warren famously stated he was able to buy a knife through an ad in a comic book, but he could never tell us which one. As usual, his evidence was always lacking. 5. Advertising for the sale of fireworks is prohibited. 6. Advertising dealing with the sale of gambling equipment or printed matter dealing with gambling shall not be accepted. 7. Nudity with meretricious purpose and salacious postures shall not be permitted in advertising of any product. Clothed figures shall never be presented in such a way as to be offensive or contrary to good taste or morals. 8. To the best of his ability, each publisher shall ascertain that all statements made in advertisements conform to fact and avoid misrepresentation. 9. Advertisements of medical, health, or toiletry products of questionable nature are to be rejected. Advertisements for medical, health, or toiletry products endorsed by the American Association shall be deemed acceptable if they conform with other conditions of the advertising code. And yeah, it's kind of short, but as you can tell, that really does those rules really does restrict a lot of creativity. You couldn't make bad guys sympathetic. They had to lose all the time. There always had to be a moral message, and of course, the more standard stuff like you can't have divorce, be treated nicely, and the vague reference to homosexuality and the illicit sex relations. Very interesting, and very much shows that the Code Authority of was a relic of its times, but also it was more restrictive than the Hays Code for movies and the FCC for radio, and as they were even able to develop over time a rating system from the PG and R, eventually PG-13 and so forth, that allowed you to have different levels to advertise different audiences. Comic books were apparently just seen just for kids, and thus no adults would ever want to try to read them. It was, pretty restrictive, and it showed really what they had to do with. And thankfully, we've dumped this piece of material. Trying not to violate the code myself right there. I have my feelings for it as someone who loves comic books and free speech in general, do not like it. And quite frankly, I do want to bring up something interesting too. This is a code that was created by the industry. It was not imposed by the government. And it is true that at the same time, local and state governments were passing laws in America to ban comic books of one nature or the other. Eventually, they will be overturned thanks to the First Amendment. And even when they try this on the video games, who are now the more popular target, the Supreme Court has actually struck these down on First Amendment grounds because, thankfully, the Founding Fathers, while flawed, did give us a wonderful tool in the Constitution and a thing like the First Amendment that allows us to fight back against crime like this. So we should always value it. And we should always value creativity. And if we don't like something, I always say go out and enjoy yourself a good comic book. If you don't like that comic book or what it says, don't read it. It's a beautiful part of being free in America. And with that supplement, that was the Comic Books Code Authority. Next week, we'll be concluding the final chapter of the history of the war on comics. But that's just the code right there, just to let you know exactly what the creators were dealing with. And now it is January 31st, 2019, time for the favorite comic book of the week. The Amazing Spider-Man, number 9, by Nick Spencer and Herbert Ramos, which continues the heist story arc that finds Spider-Man and Black Cat teaming up to figure out who stole all the superhero special items from Spidey's own web slingers to Iron Man's armor. And sure enough, it turns out to be the Thieves Guild, that old organization that Gambit used to be a part of. Spencer has a fun with this issue, with this concept, especially Spider-Man and Black Cat's past being both there used to be romantic together, and also the fact that Black Cat's still a thief and Spidey doesn't quite trust her. Also, there's an interesting subplot about Mary Jane joining a support group called the Lookups. So basically, people that are basically the sidekicks, the superheroes, having to deal with what's it like to be really in relationships with them. Ramos' art is equally great and cartoony, perfect for Spider-Man, complete with some fantastic action, and also with some nice sight gags. Let's just say once Spidey finds the superhero stash, he can't help himself. Overall, a fun run on this Spider-Man run, and it's just how it should be. Great read all around. And with that, we'll conclude this week's episode. Next week, we'll come to the final conclusion to the war against comic books, as the comic books finally pull themselves out from under the CCA, and after decades, though, and move on to finally get rid of that hated organization. Well, with that, go out and enjoy yourself a good comic book.